Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Noah here. Today we're going to break down the Thursday Night Football Showdown slate on Draftkings. We're already into Week 12, and for this Week 12 Thursday night game, we got a game between the Colts and the Texans. We're going to run through the player pool on Draftkings, talk about all the guys that I think are playable that I want to get exposure to in my lineups. I usually only play a few lineups on these Showdown slates. I don't play for much volume either. So I try and really narrow down my player pool. I don't want to talk about every single player. I want to talk about the ones that I mainly have the most interest in. So we'll do that for quarterback, running back, receiver. We'll hit on all the guys. We'll take a look at the Vegas odds for this game as well. Pretty interesting that the Texans are only 3.5-point favorites for this game at home in a game where the Colts are really injury depleted right now on their offense. So we'll talk about that as well. We'll look at some snap counts from last week. There's going to be a lot of injuries to touch on from the Colts side that could open up some value. So we'll hit on that. Just a few things before we do get started with the video, guys. As always, I would greatly appreciate it if you would drop a like down below. If you are new to the channel, if this is your first time checking out a video on my channel, thank you so much for clicking on the video. Make sure you click that subscribe button down below and also click the notification bell so that way you get notified every time I upload and you'll never miss out on any of my new videos. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at DFS by Noah. I am very active over on Twitter. You guys can give me a follow over there. If you need to contact me, if you need to DM me, my DMs are open, so you can hit me up on Twitter. But let's go ahead and take a look at this showdown slate. Start off at quarterback. So just looking at the two quarterbacks we have got Deshaun Watson at 11,600, Jacoby Brissett at 10,400. Like I said earlier, I think there's going to be a pretty good amount of value that we have. There's a lot of really cheap plays that I feel pretty confident in on this showdown slate. So I think you're going to have the salary to pay up for both quarterbacks if you want to go that route. And I usually like to get in at least one of the two quarterbacks. If I can only choose one, I'm definitely going to side with Deshaun Watson. I mean, Deshaun Watson is just one of the highest upside quarterbacks for fantasy. He's playing at home here against the Colts. This is a spot where he did pretty well earlier this season. Week 7, he played the Colts. He went 23 for 34, completed 67% of his passes, threw for 308 yards and a touchdown, had 20.52 DraftKings points. Pretty good game from Watson. Last time he faced the Colts, I would project him for similar numbers here today in this Thursday night game. So I really like Deshaun Watson here. He looked really rough in that game last week against the Ravens. I do expect a big bounce back performance from him. So at 11,600, he is one of my favorite quarterbacks to go to, just choosing between him and Brissett. I don't think he's going to be like my favorite captain play because I would much rather go to DeAndre Hopkins at captain, who I think just gives you more upside and is also $600 less. Rarely do I pay up for quarterbacks in my captain spot. I try and go to running backs and receivers. So that's why I won't probably be going to Watson at captain, but obviously I have a lot of interest in him as a flex play. Same with Jacoby Brissett as well. I have a lot of interest in him as a flex play. I think I'm probably going to be playing both quarterbacks in this game. Brissett did really well in Week 7 when he faced Houston. He did have all his weapons healthy for that game. T.Y. Hilton was healthy. Mack was healthy. He had 31.64 DraftKings points, threw for 326 yards and 4 touchdowns. Just lit the Texans up earlier this season. With T.Y. Hilton potentially missing this game, and we know Marlon Mack's going to be out, it's obviously not as good of a situation and scenario for Brissett. But still, it's a showdown slate. We are limited with our options, so I think Brissett is firmly in play at 10,400. But when you move on to the running backs, that's where it gets a bit tricky. So we do know that Marlon Mack is going to be out for the Colts. We also know that Jordan Wilkins, at least as of Wednesday afternoon, is questionable heading into this game. He was a limited participant in Tuesday's practice. We don't know yet if he's going to play. He was out last week in the Week 11 game when Marlon Mack got hurt. Mack got hurt, I believe, like at the start of the third quarter. I'm not exactly sure. I know it was like sort of later on in the game. Mack had already had like 80 rushing yards and a touchdown before he got hurt. So Wilkins did not play in that game. We saw Jonathan Williams get a lot of work. He pretty much was like the backup whenever Matt got hurt. He got 13 carries for 116 yards, had 18.7 DraftKings points. I expect if Jordan Wilkins is able to play and if he's healthy that you see Wilkins and Williams just kind of split the work. And then we're going to see a lot of Nyheim Hines in the passing game. Hines was pretty involved in the passing game in that game against the Jaguars. 3 carries, only 11 yards, so not really much done in the rushing game, but obviously the pass game, that's where he gets most of his volume. 4 targets, 3 catches, 24 yards. He did have a rushing touchdown in that game. Just choosing between the Colts running backs, it's going to be pretty tough. If Wilkins is out, then I really like Jonathan Williams at 5,600. I expect him to see the most volume. If Wilkins plays, I don't really want to go to either Wilkins or Williams because I think it's going to be a pretty even split between those two guys. But I think Nyheim Hines makes a lot of sense, just given DraftKings PPR scoring. He's going to be involved in the passing game quite a bit. This is a game I expect the Colts to most likely lose and be trailing during most of the game. So at 6,200, if I have to choose one of the Colts running backs, I'll probably side with Nyheim Hines if all running backs are healthy. Now, if Wilkins is out, then I really like Jonathan Williams at 5,600. But then choosing between the Houston running backs, it also gets pretty tricky here. You got Duke Johnson at 5K. Carlos Hyde, I believe, is really, really cheap. I'm not sure what his price is. Or no, he's 7K. Just choosing between Hyde and Johnson, it's really tough. I mean, in that Week 11 game against Baltimore, you got 9 carries from Carlos Hyde, 65 yards, got 1 target, did have a rushing touchdown in this game. He's pretty much their primary first and second down back. They'll use Duke Johnson a lot in the passing game. This is a game I think they're going to probably use Hyde a lot more. I mean, Duke Johnson only got 6 carries that game, 40 yards, only 2 targets. Choosing between Hyde and Johnson, I'd side with Carlos Hyde, but I don't think I'm going to be really going to either Colts running back or either Houston running back, If I have to choose running backs in this game, I'm probably going to side with the Colts guys, especially if Wilkins is out. That'll make it pretty clear who are going to be the running backs we want to go to, Hines and Williams. But now talking about some of the receivers, so obviously you have DeAndre Hopkins as one of the top projected options on this slate. He's 11K. I like this matchup a lot for him against the Colts. He did really well against the Colts earlier this season, had 9 catches for 106 yards and a touchdown, got 12 targets in that game. Right now, we don't know the status of Will Fuller. There's a chance Will Fuller is able to return for this game. Obviously, Hopkins' target share would go a bit down if Will Fuller is able to play in this game, but still Hopkins is going to see massive volume. He's one of the highest upside plays on the slate. I love DeAndre Hopkins in the captain spot if you can fit him in, which should be pretty easy to do. So Hopkins is one of my favorite plays today. T.Y. Hilton, we don't know the status of him yet. If he's able to play, I do like T.Y. Hilton quite a bit here. The dude just always seems to do well against the Texans. I'm not sure why it is. He's got really good numbers against them. He does really well indoors as well, and this game will be played indoors. He went for 6 and 74 with a touchdown earlier this year against the Texans, had 11 targets in that game. T.Y. Hilton for 9,600 would for sure be in play for me if he's fully able to play, if he's fully healthy, if he's not like on a snap count or anything. That's kind of news we're just going to have to wait and see on though. But with T.Y. Hilton out the last few games, if we look at the wide receiver snap percentage just for the Colts these last few games, it's pretty much been Zach Pascal and Marcus Johnson playing all the snaps of receiver. Week 10, you had 99% of the snaps played by Zach Pascal, 80% Johnson. Week 11, last week, 97% of the snaps played by Zach Pascal, 93% from Marcus Johnson. So these are pretty much the two guys that they're using in 2 wide receiver sets and the 2 guys that are playing the most and are on the field the most. Pascal's 8K, which honestly I don't think is like that good of a play. I mean, Pascal's pretty expensive. He's never a guy that's going to project to see like massive volume. When you can get Will Fuller, who maybe is able to play today for $200 less, choosing between Pascal and Fuller, I would much rather side with Will Fuller at 7,800. Obviously, this is all dependent on if T.Y. Hilton plays or if T.Y. Hilton is out. If he's out, then Pascal and Johnson are going to be the 2 guys we look to. Now, if Hilton is out, you do have Marcus Johnson for really, really cheap. He's all the way down here at 4,200. And like I said, he's been playing a lot of snaps these last few weeks, 80% in Week 10, 93% last week in Week 11. Not a guy that's going to project to see a ton of volume either, but he's so cheap on DraftKings at 4,200. He makes a lot of sense as a cheap flex play. Last week against Jacksonville, he did get 4 targets, 4 catches, 38 yards, and a touchdown, had 13.8 DraftKings points. I mean, with how injury depleted the Colts are at receiver, no T.Y. Hilton, no Paris Campbell. Devin Funchess, I don't believe is expected to play either. I might be mistaken there, but I don't believe Funchess is expected to play. So it's a really good spot for Marcus Johnson if he's able to go, or if T.Y. Hilton is out and Johnson will start as the wide receiver too. For only 4,200, he makes a lot of sense as a value receiver. So between the Texans receivers, I like Hopkins a lot. Obviously, he's one of the top plays on the slate. If Will Fuller is able to play, I do prefer him over Zach Pascal. Fuller would probably be my next favorite receiver option. Obviously, T.Y. Hilton is we're going to have to wait and see the status of T.Y. Hilton. If T.Y. Hilton is able to play, I like him quite a bit, but if he is out, I think Marcus Johnson is going to see enough volume to pay off his $4,200 price tag, so he would be very interesting as a value receiver. But now looking at the tight ends in this game, I mean, Darren Fells has been getting pretty decent amount of volume for the Texans just this season. Been used quite a bit. I mean, 6 targets week 8, 3 targets last week against Baltimore. He's not my favorite tight end play because we're going to have to watch the status of Eric Ebron. And if Eric Ebron is not able to play for this game on Thursday night, Jack Doyle would have become a staple in my lineups for only 4,400. Jack Doyle was not targeted at all last week against Jacksonville, which was pretty surprising. But assuming that Ebron is not able to play today or play on Thursday, we're going to see Jack Doyle play a ton of snaps. Just last week, or just the last few weeks with T.Y. Hilton out, it's been a pretty even split between Doyle and Ebron playing snap percentage. You're going to see these guys line up on the field a lot. I mean, we saw Ebron line up in the slot a little bit. They were using him as a receiver. 65% of the snaps played by Doyle week 11. Ebron was dealing with like an illness in that week 11 game, so he was coming off and coming on the field like he wasn't very healthy. That's one of the reasons he only played 43% of the snaps. You're going to get Jack Doyle on the field quite a bit though, especially if Eric Ebron is out. With how thin the Colts are just in terms of pass catchers, if Ebron sits this game, I have a lot of interest in Jack Doyle. If Ebron is able to play, then I think he's probably my preferred tight end to go to, just because his role seems to increase when you take T.Y. Hilton off the floor. He's been targeted a lot more. He's been playing more snaps. But we're going to have to wait and see on that Ebron news if he's able to play or not. But that's kind of what I'm looking to for receiver and tight ends, like cheap plays. I mean, if we go back to receiver snaps, with Will Fuller out, you are seeing Keke Coutee play a decent amount of snaps. He played 72% of the snaps in Week 11. It's mainly Kenny Stills and DeAndre Hopkins playing a large majority of the wide receiver snaps for the Texans. But Coutee will line up in the slot in 3 wide receiver sets. He's really cheap, 2,400. He could for sure be in play as a cheap receiver if Will Fuller remains out. He's probably going to get anywhere from like 4 to 6 targets. He's going to be on the field for at least 65-70% of the snaps. You could definitely look to him as a value. Same could be said with Chester Rogers. Chester Rogers last week played 47% of the snaps. Not a guy that's going to project to see a ton of volume, but he's very cheap. He's going to be on the field for at least a decent amount of snaps. Should run enough routes to where he can get probably 4 to 5 targets. At 2,600, he's not the worst value play, but if Will Fuller is out, I think I would much rather side with Keke at 2,400. So that's kind of where I'm looking to for cheap values. I think that's pretty much it for like the player pool. I think I covered like all the players I'm really going to be targeting. You have Kenny Stills at 6,400, who I didn't really touch on. Kenny Stills is a guy you could obviously look to. I mean, he's going to get anywhere from 5 to 7 targets. He's not my favorite play at 6,400. Like, if Wilkins is out, I would much rather play Jonathan Williams for 5,600 at the running back spot. Even Nyheim Hines as their primary pass-catching running back is very interesting at 6,200. You got like Doyle and Johnson down here for 44 and 4,200. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to Kenny Stills' price range. But if I was playing multiple lineups, I'd probably want to get him in at least like, if I was playing like 3 lineups, he'd definitely be in at least one of them. But let's talk about some roster construction now, since we pretty much covered the player pool. So I definitely want to target DeAndre Hopkins in the captain spot, and I want to build out a lineup with him as a captain. So let's plug him in at the captain. And usually whenever I pay up for a receiver at the captain, I always want to pair him with this quarterback. I usually always correlate my lineups that way. So if I'm paying up for Hopkins, I want Deshaun Watson in the flex spot if I'm paying up for Hopkins at captain. That's going to leave us $54.75 remaining per player. So there's a lot of ways we could go here. We could target one of the Colts running backs. Like if Wilkins is out, you got Williams at 5,600, who I would like a lot. I like Marcus Johnson a lot as a value receiver, assuming T.Y. Hilton remains out. We could definitely plug him in at 4,200. I think one of these tight ends from the Colts is going to have a pretty big game, especially if Ebron is out. That's going to make it pretty clear who we want to go to, Jack Doyle. So just assuming Ebron is out, I really like Jack Doyle at 4,400. That's going to give us $66.50 remaining per player. So there's a lot of ways we could go here. We could definitely try and pay up for another stud. We could probably get Brissett in if we wanted to. If we were to plug in Brissett at 10,400, that would leave us enough to play Keke Coutee, who I talked about I would like a lot. If Will Fuller is out, I think he'll play enough snaps and see enough targets to be viable at only 2,400. So that's a route you could go right there. Or you could like sort of not pay up for another expensive option, maybe go to the mid-range, look for 2 mid-range plays. Like, let's just see, assuming Wilkins is out, I'm going to have a lot of interest in Williams. So if we plug in Williams at 5,600, that's going to leave us 7,700 remaining per player. We'd be $100 short of Will Fuller, which kind of sucks because I would like Will Fuller quite a bit if he's able to play. But you could go with Carlos Hyde if you wanted to. I mentioned I'm not the biggest fan of Carlos Hyde here, but you could plug him in at 7K. I think my favorite route to go, though, is probably to pay up for both quarterbacks, Brissett and Watson. Get Johnson in as a value, Doyle in as a value, and then Kiki Kuti should be a pretty good value if Will Fuller is out. So that's definitely a roster build that I like quite a bit. Looking for other roster builds that we could go with, like if there's any like cheaper captains we could play. I think Williams would definitely be viable as a captain if Wilkins is out, just given his salary and the workload he should see. So if Wilkins is out, you got Williams at 8,400 as a captain play that you could go to. You're going to have plenty of salary to pay up for the studs. You could definitely go with all three of the top options, Watson, Hopkins, and Brissett. And that's going to leave you 4,300 remaining per player. So then you could go with Johnson and Doyle, and that's a really good lineup right there that I like quite a bit. Now, if Wilkins plays, that's going to be a bit thin. Like, we don't know how Wilkins is going to be used. It's expected to be a pretty even split between him and Williams, just in terms of running back carries. So obviously, if you're playing Williams, you probably want Wilkins to be out, but that's a lineup that I like quite a bit as well. I think if I'm just making one lineup, though, on this Showdown slate, I'm probably paying up for Hopkins at captain, pairing him with Deshaun Watson. If T.Y. Hilton's out, then I'll be looking to some of these value Colts receivers, Marcus Johnson at 4,200. If Ebron's out, I like Jack Doyle a lot at 4,400. If Ebron plays, you can replace Doyle with Ebron for 4,600. So there's plenty of cheap options available. You don't really need to go to the kickers or defenses. If you want to, you can, but I don't think you really need to on this Showdown slate. Just given all the cheap receivers that we have that should see probably at least like anywhere from 4 to 6 targets and are going to be on the field a decent amount. So I think that's it for this Showdown slate, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. Hopefully it helped you. If you enjoyed, make sure you drop a like. As always, that is greatly appreciated. If you have not yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so that way you get notified every time I upload and you'll never miss out on any of my new videos. You can also follow me on Twitter, link down in the description. Feel free to DM me on Twitter. You can contact me over there if you need to. I'm very active over on Twitter, so feel free to give me a follow. But good luck on this Showdown slate, guys. I appreciate you watching the video. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.